So, we are kicking off session 2. Last week, I talked to you all about this theme. We're spending a few weeks talking about purpose and potential. So, we've laid a foundation last week, which we're going to build on this week. If you weren't here last Sunday, let me give you a very quick recap, or you haven't managed to catch it on our YouTube. Let me give you a very quick recap, because doing that will help you understand what we're dealing with this morning. So, Ali, maybe forward it on a slide. This phrase here is really the nitty-gritty of what I was sharing last week. I was talking to you about this phrase, understanding our purpose unlocks potential. And you'll remember, we had some fun and games with a frying pan and a spoon, a packet of Tic Tacs, a can of Coke. But these were all simple physical examples of this principle in action. When we understand something's purpose, it helps us to unlock something's potential. Now, we talked about how this applies to objects, like the frying pan and the spoon, but it also applies to us as individuals. So, if we want to understand our purpose and unlock our potential as an individual, then you're going to need to figure out what that purpose is. And we talked about how our purpose, ultimately, when all is said and done, is to be in relationship with God. And that helps us individually. But then as a church, as an organization, we were really spending time thinking about this in relation to our church. Understanding our purpose as a church is going to be one of the keys to unlocking our potential as a church. So last week, I spent some time laying out what our purpose is. You remember that we talked about purpose being this word, this reason for existence. Why do we exist? And we have summarized it as this, our reason for existence, the reason we all get out of bed on a Sunday morning and come here to worship God, the reason that we do things throughout the week, all ties into this statement. Our desire, our dream, is to be a church that's in the heart of the city with a heart for the city. And that heart is summarized and put into action by 5 key areas. Now remember, this heart that we're talking about at the end, when we trace it back, we find this rooted in what's called the Great Commandment and the Great Commission. That these are things that Jesus talked about when he was here on earth 2,000 years ago. But he says, go and do these 5 things. Now we've taken those 5 things and given them slightly different terminology, but they're described as helping. We want to be a church that helps people through serving them. We want to be a church that equips people through discipling them. We want to be a church that adores God through our worship. We want to be a church that builds strong relationships through fellowship. And then lastly, but not in any order of preference, we want to be a church that goes out and tells people about Jesus through our evangelism. So we have a pretty clear purpose, I feel, as a church. Nothing's ever going to be perfect this side of eternity, but we've taken the words of Christ and we're looking to faithfully follow them, faithfully look to embed them into everything we do here at Silver City Church. So we understand our purpose, and like I said last week, that is one of the keys to then unlocking our potential as a church. And it's that I want to kind of speak to you today about, our potential as a church. Let me start off then by thinking about this. How do we define potential? What does potential actually mean? What does it look like in real life? It's helpful to think about potential in terms of energy. Energy. Now, hands up if you've heard the phrase potential energy. Quite a few people. Did you know that the term potential energy was crafted by a Scotsman? Les, did you know that? Yeah, now you do. Potential energy crafted as a Scotsman. That has got nothing to do with my sermon today, but I thought you'd just like to know that. But here's the thing. This Scottish guy has defined potential energy. He's defined what potential energy is. Now, think about energy for a moment. Even when you're sitting in this room, there's lots of energy that's going on around about us. For example, we have the lights. We have heat in the room. There's mechanical energy that's going on around us. You can hear me quite loudly because we're coming through a mic that's going through here, that's going to the back where Ali is doing a grand job of all the sound. So there's sound energy, there's electrical energy that's helping all that work. So there's tons of different types of energy, nuclear energy, whatever you want to call it. But essentially, All types of energy, regardless of how you cut up the pie, can be divided into two different types, which are up on the screen. Now, I know there's some engineers in the room. Trust me, I am not an engineer. So if this is all gobbledygook and makes no sense, and I've got this all wrong, just don't say anything until about 12:30, okay? And we'll just pretend that this is all right. But basically, energy can be divided into potential energy and then kinetic energy. So potential energy is what's written up there, is the energy that's stored in an object. This is something that's stored in an object, whereas kinetic energy is energy that's released from an object. So I've heard it defined, potential energy is what could be. It's the what could be of life. And kinetic energy is the what is. So what could be and what is. Now, I bet you didn't think you were going to get a physics lesson this morning, but here we go. I thought the easiest way to demonstrate this would be to give you a little practical example. Now, last week we had some fun with frying pans. This week, I've decided to up the ante a little bit. Now, I need to get something out of this room. And you know what? I'm going to call, seeing as Luca's still here. Luca, why don't you come up? Because I've got a little toy in here. Now, trust me, you're going to wonder what's about to happen. Right. Now, in our church, in all the time you've ever existed, have you ever seen anyone firing an arrow in a sermon? I certainly haven't. Right, now, Dad, you're unwelcome today. Your job here is just to make sure, maybe close that door and make sure no one comes through that door, okay? Have you ever seen the kid's bedroom with the dartboard in the back of the door? Have you ever seen that? Well, hopefully this isn't going to be like that. So, Dad, if you can also just stand up there with an apple in your head. And so, Luca. Now, I know, that was a joke about the apple, by the way, just in case. Luca, I know that you're a keen archerer. Is that how you say it, archerer? And we were having a little bit of fun with this on Friday, weren't we? Now, I know that you're saving up for something, right? Luca and Gio have got this little computer thing, Nintendo Switch, isn't it? And he's saving up for a computer game, okay? So they're keeping all their little pocket money and bits together, which is remarkable because they don't get pocket money. But anyway, they're saving up all their money, and they're hopefully going to save up for a game. Well, I thought I'll set you a little challenge today, Luca, because on this target over here, you can see we've got on the white ring 2, 4, 6, 8, and then in the middle is 10. I'm going to give you a little challenge, Luca. I'll give you 3 bows, okay? Now, if you can get it, one of these bows, arrows. Can you tell I'm not a professional archerer? I don't think I'll be making Paris 24. If you can get one of those bows right in the middle. What did I say? Bows? Arrows. I'm just glad you are listening. I'm just testing, but that's good. If you can get one of these in the middle, one of these arrows. Yes, I'm happy to go with that, Ali. If he hits the 2, what we'll do is I'll give you 2 practices, okay? And then on your third go is the one that determines what you're going to get, okay? So I'll give you 1 each. Now, we were doing this on Friday, so don't worry, I haven't just plunged Luca into shooting an arrow at something with no practice. Why don't you come a little bit forward here? Now, guys, don't worry, we do have public liability insurance, although it did lapse earlier this month, but that's a joke, by the way, we do. So, Luca, first practice shot, let's see how you get on, buddy. Don't think of the pressure. Oh. Right, okay. Now, I'm glad that was just a practice, because is that 6? Was that? Right, okay. In fact, I think it's 4, isn't it? We'll see. Right, second practice shot, Luca. Wait till I get out of the way, buddy. Oh, okay. Bet you're glad you're not standing there now, Dad. Okay, now, Luca, this is the defining moment, okay? Think of the potential that this arrow contains. Now, will we give Luca a bit of a cheer and a bit of an applause? Come on, Luca. Now, are you ready? Got focus. And what we're going for, remember, you've got the target, but if you get it in here, Mum's going to give you £10 towards your computer game. Right, come on, Luca, I'm rooting for you, buddy. Oh! Will we give him one more? One more. One more. This is it. Now, what you get with this one, Luca, I'm going to add, you got, yeah. That's funny how that arrow moved itself. Right, Luca, one more, right? I'm going to give you, was that a £2 one, was it? Okay, so anything you get here, I'm going to add it together, right? But this is your last chance. This is your last chance. Oh! I'm sure, round of applause, buddy. I'm sure that we'll find a way to make that up to a tenner for you somehow. Okay, what Luca ably demonstrated is this here, right? We've got a bow and an arrow. Robin Hood riding through, was it? Riding through the forest? Who knows? But here's why this is important for us to picture. This is a really good example of what potential energy is and what kinetic energy is. Now, the bow, whenever it's standing like this, has zero potential energy, right? When we get an arrow, whenever we get an arrow off of here, and we just put it into here, this doesn't have any potential energy, really. We could drop it and it would fall to the floor. That's some potential energy that this bow and arrow have got. But what happens is when, will I show you how it's done, guys? Whenever you stretch back, that is creating potential energy. There's now more energy stored in this object than there was before. And when we release it, ooh! Oh gosh, right, that's releasing it into kinetic energy. Keep this in mind because we're going to think about this today, right? This potential and then kinetic. If I was to ask you, use one word to describe the potential that is stored within our church, I wonder what word you would pick. One word to describe the potential contained within our church. I wonder what you would say. Here's the word as I've been thinking about it that I've came up with this week. The word that I would use to describe the potential energy that is stored within our church is this: unlimited. Unlimited. Now, you might be thinking, we finally got proof. Pastor Dave really has lost his marbles. And he's been spending too much time in that office on his own. Because how can you describe the potential of our church as unlimited? Surely there are limitations in the potential of our church. For example, the people in a church, surely that's one limitation. The finances of a church, surely that's another way that our church is limited. It's not like when Sheena and I go and check our bank account in the church that it just says unlimited resources available there. So surely our finances limit us as a church. Surely this building we're in, nice as it is, surely we're limited in some way by our building. So how can you then say that the potential of our church is unlimited? It seems like a little bit of a confusing thing to say. I get that. I get all those objections to using the word unlimited to describe the potential of our church. I really do. But if you believe that our church is limited in its potential, then what I want to challenge you with today and provoke you with is that I think you need to recalibrate your thinking about what church is. Let's think about that for a little minute. If we based our potential as a church on what we can do, on how good we are, on what gifts we can bring in the mix, on our own power, on our own strength, then I want to tell you that I completely agree. Our church is very, very limited by nature. But here's the thing that I want to kind of drop in to your thinking this morning that I think will help transform your picture of what potential our church has for the future. And it's this: the potential of our church isn't determined by us. The potential of our church is determined by Jesus. So, the potential of Silver City Church isn't determined by you and I. The potential of our church is determined by Jesus. Let's think about that a minute and break it down, because this is a really important concept to grasp. Because in the future, we're going to be doing some things that we aren't going to be able to achieve on our own strength. So it's important that we grasp that the potential of our church isn't based on what we can do, it's based on what Jesus can do. Whose church is this? Jesus' church. Who's the head of this church? Jesus. It's certainly not me. I might be called the lead pastor or whatever you want to call it, but Jesus is the head of this church. Whose body is this church part of? Jesus. Arwell and I were out for breakfast this week, and we had a bit of a laugh because there was a Sunday school teacher who was asking a question to the kids, and it was something like, what's the green monster in the lake called? And the little kid said something like a frog, but I know the real answer should be Jesus. And it's kind of like the truth of Sunday school is no matter what is asked, the answer is always Jesus. Well, here's the same principle applied here. No matter what we talk about in this church, no matter what way you cut it up, this church is Jesus' church. He's the head of it. We're part of his body. He's the leader of this church, the architect. So here's what we capture from that. The same limitations that apply to Jesus apply to this church. The same limitations that apply to Jesus apply to this church, because this church is part of his body. We're not some kind of separate thing to Jesus. Jesus is the head, and this church is part of his body. Let's read out Ephesians chapter 1, because this isn't something I'm just making up. This is something that's in the Bible. It says this: I want you to know about the great and mighty power that God has for us followers. It's the same wonderful power he used when he raised Christ from death and let him sit at his right side in heaven. Listen to all this. There Christ rules over all forces, authorities, powers, and rulers. He rules over all beings in this world and will rule in the future world as well. God has put all things under the power of Christ, and for the good of the church, he's made him the head of everything. The church is Christ's body and is filled with Christ, who completely fills everything. So let's ask that question again. In what way is Christ, Jesus, limited? I would say no way whatsoever. Jesus, fully man, fully God, is all-powerful, all-knowing, all-present. As this verses tell us, he rules over everything. Everything is under his power. So remember what I just said a minute ago. Our potential as a church, it isn't based on what we can do, what we can bring. Our potential as a church is based on who Jesus is and what he can do. And here's why I find that thought so exciting, is that if that is true, then we have access to unlimited power. We have access to unlimited resources through Jesus. Unlimited power and unlimited resources. Think about this. Imagine, right, Dad, you were on the welcome today at the front door. Imagine Jesus himself walked into our church building this morning. And he rolled up and he came into this room and he says, you know what? I really like it here at Silver City Church. I think I might join Silver City Church. What do you think the potential of our church would suddenly increase to if that happened? If Jesus himself physically walked into our church, sat down, and said, it's great to be with you. I'm going to join your church, and I'm going to be here every single Sunday. I'm going to come to every single prayer meeting. I'm going to be part of every single Connect group. Every time you go out onto the streets to minister, I'm going to be there. I think we'd be really encouraged by that. I think we would think, wow, can you imagine a better church member to have than Jesus? That is exactly what the situation is, except we're not seeing him physically, but instead we're seeing him spiritually in our church. This is his body. He is part of what we're doing here right now. We have the same potential in our church as if Jesus himself walked in these doors and said, yep, I'm going to join your church, and I'm going to serve in every single area of your church. I'm going to do everything I can to make your church prosper. That is what the potential of our church is. And that's why I don't have any problem saying, because of that, we have access to unlimited power through Jesus and unlimited resources. But it begs a question, and the question is this. If this is true, Dave, if churches have this unlimited potential, why is it then that some churches thrive and some churches dive? Why is it that some churches seem to blossom, seem to just be growing without hardly any effort, and they're just going from strength to strength? And other churches, even if they're working hard, sometimes they're struggling, they're going down, and they're just, things are closing. Churches close. Well, what's going on there? Did one church have potential and one church didn't? Did Jesus show up in one church and didn't show up in the other church? What's going on there? And actually, I think the answer to that question is really simple. I don't think it's that complicated, to be honest. Let me tell you the difference between what I believe thriving churches have managed to do compared to diving churches, and it's this. We all have the unlimited potential of Jesus in our church. And remember what I said, potential is stored energy. It's the what could be. And imagine a bow and arrow where you could pull it back to an unlimited amount, right? Obviously, I can't do that. But imagine you could pull it back unlimitedly. That is what the potential of our church is. Here's what thriving churches are able to do. They take that potential and then they release it. They release it into kinetic energy. Let me tell you, if all churches can do is just say, yep, look, we've got unlimited resources, unlimited power at our disposal, but they never do this, aim at the target, and then fire the arrow at something, then that potential stays on the shelf. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't make any material difference in the world we live in. Here's something to keep in mind. For potential to be realized, it must be released. For potential to be realized, it must be released. There's no good having potential that isn't released. When I was a kid at school, I had a teacher, I wasn't going to read this, but I think I will. But I had a teacher in my maths teacher, high school. And I had this same maths teacher for probably 5 years in the bounce, right? And as anyone will tell you, certainly my dad, who tried to develop a love of maths in my life, but probably would you admit that maybe you failed miserably in that one, Dad, do you think? I wasn't probably maybe naturally that gifted in maths, and I certainly didn't have any inclination to get any better. This maths teacher, I basically made him, he was pulling out his hair with me near the end. I found one of my old report cards recently, right? When we were packing up our house. Listen to what my maths teacher wrote about me. Now, Mum and Dad, if you haven't heard this before, then maybe just close your ears. I can't remember if I ever told you this or not. All right, let me find it. So, and I just want to say, I agree with everything he wrote. So this is like 30 years ago, bear in mind, but he wrote this about me. He says, despite a general lack of effort this session, David has actually improved his performance in general level work. He does, however, find great difficulty with credit work. His greatest problem surrounds his self-generated idleness and marked lack of concentration. This has become a daily occurrence, which can be countered only through extremely close supervision by the teacher. Progress will be possible when David accepts that cooperation on his part is more likely to lead to improved performance. Ouch. Imagine getting it. I hope my kids weren't listening to that, because see if they came home with a report card like that, they'd be getting a big telling off. Here's me as a 13, 14-year-old. The teacher, I think this is what he was saying. It wasn't that he didn't care about me. He was saying, you know what, actually, David's performance could be improved. David does have some potential in this area, but the problem is he's not releasing it. He's come into the class, self-generated idleness, ouch, and a marked lack of concentration. He says, if David can get those things right, he can start releasing some of these arrows towards a target of improving in maths. But realistically, I never really did get that far, I'll be honest. And I read that now and I think, oh my goodness, what a shame on Mr. Parry, my maths teacher. But let's keep this in mind. For potential to be released, I realize it must be released. Let me try and bring everything I've been saying today then into some kind of coherent thought that helps us as we move forward into this new season of life that we're moving into with Silver City Church. So the challenge for us is this. How do we go about becoming a thriving church? How do we learn we can release this potential? Because ultimately, if we don't learn to do that, the potential is just stored up on a shelf, never going to be doing anything. And how well we are able to release that potential will determine effectively whether this church continues to grow and thrive, or whether this building in 2 years' time is turned into a Tesco Metro. If we don't find a way of releasing the potential that's within our church, like many other churches all across the world, across this city, across this country, we'll dive. I believe that. So here's the good news. The good news is releasing potential isn't actually very difficult, I don't think. It's actually pretty easy. And it links exactly into our heart. What's the next slide, Ali? Have we got another slide after this? Yeah, right. So, remember from this is a new pointer that we've got, our heart here. What have all these words got in common? They're all ing words, I-N-G. They're all doing words. They all require us to do something to complete what this says. So, helping. Our church, unlimited potential. Helping. Every time one of us does something to help someone else, every time you do something that serves someone else or serves the church in some way, this is what you're doing. You're helping us release some of the potential that's stored within our church, and you're releasing it at the target. So these aren't just like fanciful things that we've made up. This is what Jesus says. If you do these 5 things, then I'm going to be with you in that, and through my power, you're going to change the world. So for example, my mum, now I'm going to embarrass you a little bit here, Mum. The other day, she came in here when I was having my lunch and we were chatting. She looked at the windows at the back, and she saw some of the windows had like massive bird droppings all over them. So anyone that knows my mum knows what's coming next. So she was like, right, I'll just go and get a bucket out the kitchen, filled it up with the mop, took it out there, and here she was, I can't remember what time it was in the afternoon, washing this bird poo off our windows with a big mop. Now, in terms of glamorous jobs in a church, that wouldn't figure very highly, would it, to be honest? But here's what you were doing, Mum, when you were doing that. You were getting your bow and arrow out, and you were releasing some potential of our church. I believe that. Whenever someone volunteers for a ministry or something, food bank, so you guys that are doing food bank, every time you come to this building and serve the people that come to food bank, you're releasing the potential of our church. Equipping. Every time you equip yourself or you're in the process of helping someone else become equipped, again. Every time we come and we worship together and we give God our adoration, I believe what's happening is we're releasing the potential of our church. Our relationships, connect groups that we're going to be starting up in a couple of weeks' time. If you haven't signed up yet, get onto our website and sign up. Every time you are part of something that develops healthy relationships, connect group, every time you go to a connect group, I believe the potential within our church is being released. It's not just staying potential, it's getting released into kinetic energy, which actually makes a difference. Telling. Every time one of us tells someone else about Jesus, no matter what that looks like, whether it's outside in the street and you bump into someone and you just invite them to church, every time you share a social media post from Silver City Church, every time you pray for someone, a colleague or something like that at work, what you're doing is you're releasing potential over and over again. This is how our potential as a church is going to be realized. You know, sometimes we can get awful airy-fairy and highfalutin in churches. I don't really think it needs to be very complicated. I think if our church focuses on these 5 areas and takes them to heart and starts firing these arrows out in every direction that we can think of, we're going to see God meet us and do some incredible things in our church. So, this bow and arrow, it's a simple example, but it's one that I want you to keep in your mind for the future, because it is, I think, as simple as this. We've got unlimited potential in our church. because Jesus is the one who gives us our potential. It's not our job to create the potential of the church. That's already been done. Our job is just to go about releasing it. And now we know the target we're aiming at. It's those 5 things, our heart areas. It's one of the reasons I'm so excited about this book, Scattered Servants. So this is the book we're going to be studying in Connect groups. Like I said earlier, if you haven't signed up, get on to silvercitychurch.uk and sign up. This book, I think, there'll be a lot of provocative thinking in this book, and you won't agree with everything in this book, and that's totally fine. But what this book will do, I think, is will provoke our thinking about how can we go from being people who are happy and content to have potential to actually turn it into something tangible, to turn it into something that makes a difference in the world we live in. I don't know about you. I don't want to be a church that is happy to have potential. Our church has had, over the years I've been involved, there's been times where we've had lots of potential, or that's the wrong terminology. I would say there's been times where we've been able to release that potential in greater ways than others. In the future that I see is a church in every single area releasing arrow after arrow at the targets that we're looking to hit. I'm wholeheartedly, passionately believe a church doing that is humble and is committed to fulfilling the purposes of God in the city, can turn the city upside down. I really believe it. I don't care if we don't have the greatest building in the city. Don't care if our bank balance isn't the biggest of any church in the city. Because I firmly believe that when Jesus sees our heart, he's going to turn up and he's going to do some incredible things in us and through us. Our potential isn't dependent on us. It's dependent on Jesus. Let's remember that. And this book, I believe, is going to be something that helps us take a step forward in that area. Okay. We've got a lot to look forward to as a church. I really believe that. I'm really excited about what the future holds. And I just want to pray over us just now as we're just coming to kind of a close. Lord God, you see everything we've just talked about there this morning. And in and through it all, Lord, I just pray that you send something of our heart here for you at Silver City Church. We are not a perfect church by any stretch of the imagination. But the one thing I will say for us, Lord, is that we have a heart after you. We have a heart to see your purposes played out in our city. We have a heart to seek you and to invite your power to be the source behind our church. Lord, in those areas where we are maybe prideful about, where we're trying to do things on our own strength, I just pray that you just show us actually the key to this, the key to seeing your kingdom flourish and grow in this area, in this city, is actually to rely on your strength and your power and your potential. And I know that when we take these simple steps of faith, when we go about helping people, equipping people, adoring you, building relationships and telling people about you, I believe you're going to come and do some wonderful things in and through us, Lord. So Holy Spirit, just take what I've shared, let the bits that really need to sink in, I just pray you drive them deep within us, drill them right into the core of who we are. And the bits that we don't and that we just can forget, just let them, go away into the wind. Because I believe that you're building your church here, Holy Spirit. And we're excited to be part of that. We're excited to see what you're going to do in and through us in the future. In Jesus' name, amen.